Anne-Marie Purcell, and I was Chief Transformation Officer at Transport for Greater Manchester. So I was accountable for delivering bus franchising in GM, and I'm now advising a range of other local authorities and mayoral authorities on how to operationalise and deliver bus franchising.
Okay.
And Dave Bedell from Octavius Infrastructure. Octavius are one of the fastest growing providers and maintainers of transport infrastructure in the UK.
Very, very to the point.
Got that. I thought I'd get that in first.
Yeah, exactly. I think we're on there. Obviously, the title of the session is Delivering Transformative Change with Minimal Disruption. I guess all I need to precede that with is how.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. As Anne-Marie and myself were planning this session, it sort of took me back to an earlier point in my career where I was seconded into a client organisation. And that was fantastic experience from a supply chain perspective in terms of understanding, you know, the many different challenges and different perspectives that a client organisation has to consider in delivering the infrastructure. So my core takeaway was that realization that quite often a client body and a deliverer of infrastructure look at the same challenge through slightly different lenses. And I think that's a really important learning facet from both sides. So I guess I'm interested, Anne-Marie, you know, what can you set out what practical delivery looks like from a client-side perspective in terms of a major investment program, be that a bus franchising or a piece of physical infrastructure? What are the considerations?
Yeah, I mean, the main one for me is starting at the start and being really clear on the problem that you're trying to solve. So, so you can articulate it. So if you want to keep confidence with the public when you're delivering a big transformation, is being really clear from the outset about what the vision is, what you're trying to solve, and being really clear about that. So there's an expectation set, and a level of realism. Don't oversell what you're going to deliver, because when the disruption comes, which to some degree it will, and we'll talk about that in a bit, you don't want them to think, well, that disruption wasn't worth it because I thought I'm getting something that I'm not getting what you sold me at the outset. And I know you've got an example around your view around HS2 in that kind of expectation setting, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think how we present what we do to stakeholders, and I think stakeholders is such a complex environment. You know, in the modern day, it's not just users of the network, it's finances, it's network operators, it's a multitude of owners in a devolved regional administration. So I think how we actually present that piece of work absolutely sets us up for failure or success. Mm-hmm. And I guess in reflection, you know, without getting political, there's probably no greater example of the potential to tarnish stakeholders' perception of infrastructure and large investment programs than HS2. And when you look back, you know, HS2 was predicated by the PM at the time as shaving 36 minutes off a journey from Birmingham to London. It was actually a capacity enhancement scheme to enable increased passenger and freight use of the rail network. But it was clouded with that identity from day one. And I think without doubt, you know, there will have been individual and collective errors during the delivery of HS2, which sort of agitated public perception. But we never actually called it for what it was. We never actually said we are increasing capacity to ensure that we can move freight between conurbations more sustainably and increase the frequency and reliability of passenger trains. And had we done that, I think stakeholders and the users of that network are much more receptive to the disruption and the turmoil that, you know, a complex project of that scale and magnitude will ultimately bring.
Sorry, I just need to interrupt there for a second, because isn't that selling the wrong thing rather than the plan itself not delivering? Or are you saying that if you told them what they were getting, they would have been happier to deal with the disruption?
I think if we are more honest with, if we are more honest with our stakeholders in terms of what we are intending to deliver,
Okay.
and what that will entail for them on a day-to-day basis,
Then they'll accept it.
then they can absorb that within their everyday lives, whatever that may be. And from a stakeholder perspective, I think the interesting observation around HS2 was that we had huge swathes of that stakeholder demographic, i.e. taxpayers who are actually paying for the scheme, who could not relate to the scope and the intent of the scheme of 36 minutes. So it comes back to how do we actually dress up, how do we phrase, how do we communicate back to that stakeholder environment what it is that we're doing.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think it's definitely being really clear what the problem is. You've obviously got to put it in a way that kind of brings it to life for each stakeholder group. You know, so for business it might be the freight piece of it. For passengers it'll be the reliability. So you've got to bring it to life for them and how you present it to them. But I do think being really clear on the problem that you're trying to solve and what the resulting impact will be for them is really important in order to prepare people for that disruption, because they need to see what benefits it's going to be. And if you dress it up as something else, or if that message doesn't land, whether you mean to or not, you'll then lose them. So in the middle of the disruption and, I don't know, the house is being damaged or they can't get to work on time or whatever, they're thinking, why are they doing this again? What was the point of all this disruption? I don't get this. What am I getting out of this? And so you really need to remember that when you get to the point of the disruption, assuming it comes, which it likely will, then you've got to have set them up on the journey and take them with you and not lose them, right? Because, transport projects can take years, So you need to keep reminding them of what you're trying to do and what are the next stages and when they can feel the disruption. If you just come out at the start and say, we're doing this and it's going to take 7 years, and you forget about them and go away again until you start digging up roads, then you'll likely have lost them along the way.
I guess there's an expectation that if you make it sound really glamorous, then people will put up with it. I'm happy if I'm getting a new kitchen, but if it's just the drains that everything looks the same afterwards, then what did I put up with?
Well, I think, for me, as Anne-Marie and I were chatting over the past week on the build-up to the event, we're obviously looking at a similar exam question through two different lenses. But what I learned from Anne-Marie was when we were looking at the bus franchising for the B network, that was actually the first step that triggered a domino effect of investment programs, of infrastructure delivery that led to what we see out in the city today, which is the integrated network between buses, between mass transit systems, all in that consistent B network library. But the starting point for that was the franchising to help you understand data and passenger usage, and that's the level of communication that we should be exploring and sort of sharing with stakeholders.
So it would sound from the conversation so far that it's inevitable. You're definitely going to get disruption if you have transformative change, but it's more manageable if you do it well?
Yeah, I think it's not inevitable, but I think if we said that projects don't cause disruption for people, whether that's in your organisational or out on the road for passengers or for residents, I think we'd be unrealistic, if I'm totally honest. I think the point around franchising is about taking the levers of control back into public ownership. Yes, there's some transformative elements that went live with bus franchising, but the key is the control and the levers of control. Well, you've got to make sure that that's well articulated, because that doesn't sound very sexy.
Yes.
But actually, you've got to articulate what outcomes that brings for customers in the long run.
I was actually going to ask what levers. I hear the statement, I understand it, but not particularly sure what specifics.
So if you, under franchising, you take control of the specification of the network, so you can look at the social value aspect of why you would keep some services running versus whereas a commercial operator might not. You've obviously taken on control of the revenue, so therefore you're before franchising, authorities are often subsidising routes for social reasons that don't make money. But they don't get the revenue from the ones that do. So taking control means you've got both. You've got both sides of it, so it helps balance that. You've also got the customer proposition, so how you articulate with the customer, the brand, all the non-fare box revenue, for example. So there are levers where you set the specification, you put in a performance regime to manage the operators, and the operators get the buses out the door and on the road, and you manage that communication with customers, you manage the specification, and you control the performance of the operators through contracts and through a partnership, essentially.
And from the contractor's point of view?
I think from delivering that project and that vision, it's a similar level of detail in terms of once the bus franchise is there, we're then talking about taking the next step, which is how do we introduce, say, the urban transit system. That's when the physical disruption comes in. So, we've got to be open in terms of what that might mean and how we're going to mitigate it, but ultimately what the end results are. And those end results might be that a young mother with a pushchair or somebody with physical disability can move quite freely between different modes of transport because we've aligned all of the access levels to a consistent level on the trams, which are the same as the access levels that are consistent with a bus. And that all takes physical adjustment and change. So I think there's a perception quite often that, people see bollards and sort of construction hats and high vis and wonder what on earth the outcome is. And we can probably be more intelligent and tactile in terms of communicating and explaining that.
And do you think both sides of the invisible fence are together or speak earlier enough in the project?
I think we're evolving down that route, and I think in general the delivery of any project, regardless of scope, has that heavy burden of balancing outcome expectations against practical delivery needs.
Okay.
And I guess I'm interested in terms of how you managed that, Anne-Marie, when you were implementing the B network.
Yeah, so for me, I'm not sure any transport project is going to be done by one organisation, So there's a multitude, and in franchising it was a range of the authority, the operators, both outcoming and incoming, which is that interesting dynamic of the first time you do, well, any time you do franchising, but particularly the first, you've got suppliers and contractors who are helping, with technology or infrastructure, whatever. And I think the key is, one of the things that worked really well in GM was genuinely articulating that vision for everybody. And whilst we had contracts, of course we did, and yes, sometimes they got taken out of a drawer. The reality is that we were working for this goal. Andy was on before. He's very good at articulating his vision, and that's very helpful because that means everybody gets behind that same. And it gave me a very clear vision, which meant I could give that to my team, but also it gave other people who were working towards that with us that very clear objective. But they've also got to have their own outcomes. If you just see it as in this instance for bus franchising, the societal outcome of bus franchising, and you don't make sure that the partnership and the contracts have physical outcomes for the organisations, then there's no reason for them, apart from this, big ambition, there's no real reason for them to majorly participate. And I think it has to be the balance of both. I think organisations need to come together, private sector with the public sector, to deliver these visions. They have to be passionate about it, because it's not just, these things pay back at the end of the day to businesses as well. Connected transport pays back to businesses. So they need to be part of that transformation and feel part of the overall objective. But they do need to have some outcomes and we need to make sure the contracts enable that really, to enable them to be able to work together collectively for that common goal, but also get an outcome themselves.
It's interesting you mentioned about Andy's session because he made it clear that having devolved power helps.
It does.
Because everybody around here knows the benefits and can see it. Whereas if you have to convince somebody in London and they don't get it, the likelihood is that they'll say, is it about 36 minutes to Manchester? Okay.
But it also in reverse, having it locally from a disruption perspective, when you've got someone locally like Andy championing something, there's a belief that it is being done for the local good. It's not being imposed. So I agree with what your point was. Definitely agree with your point. But I also agree with having someone locally who is championing something helps people understand that there's a disruption coming potentially, but there's a reason. The person who's championing it has got our interests at heart because we locally elected them, and I think that in turn is helpful.
And it's interesting because before I come to you, Dave, sorry, it was interesting you say that because yesterday we had the Northern Powerhouse Rail team on. They said that it's taken them so much longer to get the project off the ground because nobody was articulating the same story.
Yeah.
Someone was saying it's about getting people from Hull on a plane
That's the same
at
with HSC,
Manchester
yeah.
and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So I guess it's true. Sorry.
No. I mean, Anne-Marie said a few things there that I'd just like to pick up on. I think it's fascinating, the reference to moving away from the default option of picking the contract out of the draw. I'd like to explore that. I think I 100% agree that the procurement model, how you actually bring different skills together from the public and the private sector in order to deliver the outcomes, is essential and probably undervalued in terms of how impactful that can be. But I'm curious, how did you approach that within that environment? Because inevitably, to make an omelette, you have to crack the egg. We don't live in utopia. Things do go wrong. And the natural reaction is to go back to check the contract and say, well, who's at blame?
Who's at fault? Yeah.
How do you create that sort of behavioural shift within the team where you say, well, let's not look at the contract, let's actually talk about how we can deliver what's needed?
To some degree, it starts with how you segment your team to some degree. So we had, under me, we had like a team that were dealing with the procurement, and then I had a team who were really worrying about the programme, the mobilisation activity. And when the contracts were awarded, we had a real practical sense. We had a big kick-off in which we all come together. And not a kick-off in a bad sense.
Sorry, I thought the
kick-off
other kick-off.
in a good sense.
All right, okay.
We had them as well, but at times. But we definitely had a proper nice kick-off, good kick-off. Sorry, that's a project term, where we all got in a room and kicked off. But when we got in the room, I was really, really clear that this was the team that was going to deliver the Manchester vision, and whether that was Tranche 1, Tranche 2 or Tranche 3. And I was really clear that the contract matters.
Yeah.
Of course, it absolutely matters. It absolutely even more so matters when you end up in BAU, because with franchising you have like a 9-month mobilisation period, and that is actually just to get it stood up. And it's a different approach when you're in BAU and you're running it than it is when you're trying to stand it up. So I said, our job is to get to that date and to get it stood up. There is a different job after that.
Of course.
And between now and them 9 months, I want any solutions on the table. So I was very clear, I wanted transparent solutionising between all parties. If that then, the best solution results in the contract having to come out the drawer, then so be it. But we didn't start, I was really clear, we don't start from getting the contract out and saying, what can we do?
That has to
we
be
start
the
from
option. Yeah.
If an operator thinks this is the best solution and we pass it around, or we think this is the better solution to solve a delivery problem, then we would kick that around. And only then, once we'd kind of come up with the solution, would we then go, right, do we have to open the contract for either party's benefit, really?
So therefore, to both of you, 2 last questions. First one is, with the benefit of hindsight on the last big projects that you both worked on, go back, what would I have changed to make it the outcome either better or quicker or more efficient for both of you? And then the last question is, what would you leave the audience here with to say, under no circumstances do the following, or absolutely do the following? So those are the last 2 questions. Start with you, Dave.
I think to tackle the first, I would reflect on confusing coordination with collaboration.
Okay.
I think there's a distinct difference between the two, especially where you have multiple organisations working together. And I do think this leads into the contractual arrangement and the procurement model.
Yeah.
When you have multiple entities, that there is a natural human tendency to go back and protect self-interest. So you can coordinate your activities, but as soon as that egg breaks, as soon as you come across that challenge, there is a natural instinct to revert to time. Collaboration for me is when Anne-Marie's problem becomes my problem, and it's our collective problem to resolve. And we stand or fail by whether we do that. Okay. And we are incentivised or penalised collectively as to whether we do that. And I think that leads us back into probably the second part of your question in terms of what I would leave the audience of the criticality of the procurement model. But I'll let Anne-Marie respond on the first one.
Okay.
Yeah, you know what? I'll be honest, there's loads of lessons from GM.
Big ones.
Yeah, well, there will be. I mean, we were the first, so I'm not going to kick myself from it.
You shouldn't. No.
I think the key is making sure that we learn them. And, look, it's difficult. We've set a very clear timeline. It would have been great if we'd have had more time between us with each phase, because you want to learn as much as you possibly can. I think one of the things that I think the other authorities are taking on board is that space in between each tranche. We just didn't have the luxury of that, unfortunately. So I think, but I also think people pay a lot of. They don't really take on lessons learned properly. They really, I mean, it's the most frustrating thing in the world. Like people, you literally say, please, like
do the following,
do this or don't do it. So I think for me is we need to capture them and put them into practicality. We did some of that between each of the procurements. It's actually translated them into changes in the contracts, and I think you do genuinely need to do that. I mean, I'll leave you to do. You go first with the audit thing, and then I'll do it.
I mean, I think. Look, when I reflect on procurement, and it was really interesting listening to the ICG Live event yesterday that was happening in some areas of the exhibition. And there was an awful lot of talk about enterprise delivery and the conceptual benefits of enterprise delivery. And I think as an industry, we're all aligned around those benefits. We can see, we can understand the benefits. But it's only when they become pressure tested.
Yeah.
And I think we're in a scenario, a potential scenario, where we risk cherry-picking the convenient, the good bits of that enterprise delivery model, and not necessarily accepting that, okay, there is collective skin in the game. So I think for us to really move forward with transformational change as an industry, and like many in the room, my view is that we are at a level of investment that is unforeseen in my career, certainly, in transport infrastructure. And that's exciting, but equally I feel as if we have a responsibility to use that investment wisely and make sure that we deliver infrastructure that serves generations to come. And I think to do that, we have to harness the right skills from across the public and the private sector under a new private finance model, which successive governments have ran scared of addressing.
Okay.
And wrap that around a collaborative procurement framework that actually brings everybody aligned under common outcomes and common risk share.
So mine is going to be a bit of a weird one. So mine is mine is be brave. I think. Look, going back to the disruptive thing for customers, right? Tranche 1 was more disruptive than Tranche 2. Tranche 2 was more disruptive than Tranche 3. We learned, we got better. And I think I use this analogy all the time in change because that is my background. You can keep the plane up in the sky until all the beautiful, I don't fly planes, so go with it. But you can keep the plane up in the sky. First of all, why do people get on planes? They don't get on planes for the flight. They get on planes because it's taking them to a wedding, a holiday, a business, a conference. There's an outcome at the end of that. They don't get on the plane for the flight, do they? They want to land safely. Obviously, it's a means to an end. So the pilot can sit up there in the sky waiting for all the signs to say this is the smoothest landing on the planet and the weather's beautiful. But the reality is if you land 30 minutes later, assuming you do land and you don't run out of runway or fuel because you've waited so long, if you land and you land really smoothly, no one's going to remember the smooth landing if they've missed the wedding, they've missed their onward connection to the holiday or whatever. So sometimes you have to land even if it's not perfect, because the broader outcome is better. And so I liken it to, if the first landing's Ryanair, you bang down and you hold on for dear life. As long as the next one is more like EasyJet and your last one is British Airways, I mean, we might be struggling with an Etihad. I think you will deliver out 80% is better than 100% and nothing. And look at the B network now. It had its bumps, the bumps were there. And it's not perfect, I think Andy said that before, but the reality is people are looking at it going, we got it. We absolutely got it. And we got it on time and we got it on budget, and it wasn't perfect. But no transformation ever is, and I think sometimes you've got to be brave to land, even in stormy weather.
Sounds like a perfect way to finish.
Thank you very much.
Just before I thank these guys, are there any burning issues or questions from the floor? Can we just get a microphone? Don't forget it between them getting you the microphone. It's just coming. Are there any other questions after this one? Assuming it's not the same question.
Is it about aeroplanes?
No, don't ask me anything about aeroplanes. Buses, yeah, but not aeroplanes.
Hello. Great.
Hello.
My name's Callum. I work for Bristol City Council. I'm a transport planning intern. I want to start with a little anecdote relating to your being clear about what you're doing to stakeholders. After the war, entire neighbourhoods were flattened to build motorways, widen roads, etc. And we've had a lot of, in the present day, we've had controversy simply closing roads to make active travel better for people who live in the areas. I think sometimes we talk about what the benefits of what we're doing are, but we're not clear about what the disadvantages are, which is obviously the displaced traffic, inconvenience to people, particularly people who rely on vehicles, tradespeople, people with disabilities, might make their lives harder. Is it important to be clear about the disadvantages as much as the advantages of what you're doing to bring the public on board with what you're trying to achieve?
It's quite interesting actually, because I had a dinner with Daniel from Active Travel England last night. It's like, we actually talked about this yesterday. I come up with a weird idea if we could make buses slimmer. And he said there was a Harry Potter bus. I don't know what that is, but if we could make buses really slimmer, they'd be okay with cycles. I think you plan, and we need to understand how we plan for everybody. And I think that's the difference. I think saying what the disadvantages are is hard, and it takes courage.
Yeah.
But I do think we need to be thinking. You're a planner, so a generation of planners. We need to be starting to think about how all the modes coexist, but not just coexist, work together. I'm not a cyclist. I'm certainly not fit enough. But if they connect us to other modes of transport, and we need to be honest about how they will integrate with each other. And that, to some degree, will articulate some of the disadvantages, but we need to do it in a way where we're showing that we have a strategy. We're not just saying, oh, we've replaced this road for bikes, but you just need to sod off and go on another road. We need to say, what is it on a longer journey? And it takes it, that omelette, crack and eggs thing is right. We might have to disrupt you for a bit, but we have a plan for you.
Yeah.
We're not just ignoring you. And I think that's the difference. Sorry.
Yeah, I think there's a further nuance on that, in that, the reality, we have really diverse societies now, and infrastructure serves society. And, no doubt about, we have to be more open about the benefits and the disbenefits, but equally, we need to learn to talk about the benefits in the context of the communities. I recall we delivered Access for All scheme. Essentially, it's putting a bridge and some lifts over a railway line out in rural Cambridgeshire. The challenge that we had with that particular scheme was that it was adjacent to the local town centre, the local high street. So we had to go and have conversations with each individual shop holder to explain not just what we were doing, and they're not just talking about the neon political buzzwords of what the outcomes were, but explain the benefits to them. That if we did this, we were actually increasing the footfall of people that would come to their shops. And yes, there would be a short-term disruption to them, but that long-term return would more than outweigh and compensate that. So I don't think it's just about having honest conversations. It's about presenting those conversations with the right context to different demographics of the communities that we're impacting.
Can I just say one thing for both you to respond, and then we'll definitely have to call it a day. When you say disadvantages, is that a disadvantage or is that a disruption to get to the advantage? In other words, if the advantage is you're going to get an active highway, is it a disadvantage or is it something that has to happen for you to have it?
I can't remember if I said it when in my original question. It was in the context of like low traffic neighbourhoods or
Yeah.
living
Okay.
neighbourhoods. I can't remember if I.
Yes.
I think it's a disadvantage
yeah,
to all the
you
other
mentioned
road
that.
users.
To the other road
It's
users
the other road
whilst
users.
it's happening.
Yeah.
Okay,
People who
got you.
are
Wanted to
driving-
make sure we answered your question. That was all.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think for me,
Yeah.
it's starting a place.
Yeah.
We often, somebody said on so I was working with Thomas, he said, we start a project and we need to start a place. So we need to decide what we're trying to achieve
Yeah.
and then work through and then decide what the projects are. And if we start a place, we understand why we're doing things for that area, that region really. So I think we need to start on why we're doing it and then work out what the projects are. And the projects could be a mix of, we close that road to put a cycle lane, but we open another one up and we do something different with that for cars.
Yeah.
So they've got to come together as one strategy, not individual projects that deliver a place-based approach, really.
And that's the perfect way to finish. So, Anne-Marie, Dave,
you.
thanks very much for your time.
Thank
you.